Tony Beets, the Dutch miner who converted Yukon dirt into millions, has captivated audiences more than few other gold rush stars. But fans have been asking the same question over and over lately. What had actually occurred to him? Tony's story has devolved into a mix of fact, fiction, and outright anarchy due to his fiery legal battles and wild online allegations that he was given a life sentence. How, therefore, did one of the most resilient miners on TV become the subject of so much conjecture? You might be surprised to learn the truth about Tony Beets. So stay put. The life of Tony Beets starts in the Netherlands on December 15, 1959. Tony was born to Klaus and Magda Beets and raised in the small community of Whitedeens. Growing up on the family farm instilled in him a love of heavy machinery and the value of hard labor at a young age. His family relocated to Bergwoerd, Friesland, when he was just 7 years old. However, life wasn't simple. Young Tony had to step up and take up the majority of the agricultural chores after his father had a catastrophic accident. He was molded by the experience, gaining maturity, self-assurance, and fortitude that would help him overcome any obstacles in the future. Despite coming from a long line of farmers, Tony never considered that to be his ultimate goal. He was desperate for a change by the time he was in his early 20s. Therefore, he took a big risk at the age of 23 with his girlfriend Minnie, who would eventually become his wife. They left the Netherlands and traveled to British Columbia, Canada, with only $300 in their pockets and no English language skills. It was a risky choice, and from the start, survival required hard work. After finding that milking cows in Salmon Arm, Canada, for $4 an hour wasn't fulfilling, Tony moved to construction. He demonstrated his ability to lead and adapt by being promoted to foreman in just 1 week. He eventually gained invaluable expertise that would later define his profession by learning how to handle heavy gear and working on oil pipelines. Minnie, meantime, put in just as much effort, working in food service, retail, and healthcare to support their goal. Then came the rumor that made all the difference. Word got out that gold miners in the Yukon were making over $1,000 a week. That was all the inspiration Tony needed. He packed everything and moved to Dawson City in March 1981. However, he found that he arrived too early. The season for gold has not yet begun. He went back to British Columbia to continue working the oil fields since there were no other jobs available. He never forgot that Yukon fantasy, though. Finally, 3 years later, in 1984, the door opened. Tony didn't think twice when a mining firm called him back to the Yukon. He began modestly, running large equipment at the Tamarack mines, which would later become his own. Everything started to change at that point. In the Dawson district, Tony eventually started his own mining business, Tamarack Incorporated. It developed into one of the biggest privately owned placer gold mines in the whole Yukon area, with a little bit of luck, persistence, and hard work. However, it wasn't an easy journey. Working 12 to 14 hours a day, Tony and his team endured harsh, cold, unpredictable machinery failures, constant pressure, and only roughly 7 months of mining weather annually. He has straightforward philosophy. The only way to make gold mining successful is to be there every single day. He realized that despite his best efforts, luck was a major factor. You could become a millionaire in one season and be wiped out in the next. He relied on his team, particularly his family, for this reason. Minnie took over as the operation's mainstay, managing all financial and bookkeeping decisions. She was intelligent, well-behaved, and occasionally the only thing keeping Tony from making a dangerous investment. Over time, their children, Bianca, Mike, Kevin, and Monica all joined the family company. Although Tony acknowledged that he was harsher on them than anyone else, he also made sure they received fair compensation and knew the true meaning of hard labor. Despite the demanding schedules, his children continued to return each season. Additionally, they went together when the mining season concluded, which allowed Tony to simply be a father rather than the employer. Alongside his family, Tony continued to grow. He obtained other claims at Indian River and Clear Creek after securing his first significant claim at Paradise Hill. His aspirations were not limited to that. He continued by restoring 2 large ancient gold dredges that could process vast amounts of earth. Now, Season 2 of the popular Discovery Channel series Gold Rush was when Tony's ascent to TV celebrity really took off. He stood out right away because of his rough, direct approach. When Todd Hoffman, the show's protagonist, was having trouble sustaining his mining dream that season, he looked to Tony for advice. For those who are not familiar, Gold Rush, which in its first season was called Gold Rush Alaska, follows a number of family-run mining crews as they travel across Canada and Alaska in search of wealth. 6 men from Oregon, who had lost their jobs, chose to risk everything on a gold mining trip in Porcupine Creek, Alaska, were the focus of the show, which debuted in December 2010. What's more, none of them had any actual idea what they were doing. They learned mining the hard way, through trial and error and a great deal of frustration, while the cameras were rolling. That first crew was led by Todd Hoffman, who was beset by issues from the start. His wash plant, a vital piece of machinery that kept malfunctioning and reducing output, was the source of his greatest headache. Fortunately, James Hears, the team's mechanic, was able to keep everything functioning just about. To help get things back on track, Todd eventually brought in his friend Dave Turin, a seasoned professional who had worked in his family's quarry. But there was plenty of drama throughout the season. Tension skyrocketed when mining specialist Dakota Fred Hurt entered the picture halfway through. In one episode, the crew members even got into a full-on physical altercation. Nevertheless, the Hoffman crew persevered through the tumult, finishing the season with 14.6464 ounces of gold, enough to validate the dream and guarantee the show's continuation for a second season. At that point, Tony Beets appeared. He made his debut in the Season 2 episode Drill or Die. Although it didn't play a significant part, it left an impression. Tony intervened with one important piece of advice as Todd Hoffman's enterprise was collapsing: test drill before mine. By that time, Todd's team was beginning to doubt his ability to lead. Thus, Tony's counsel proved to be invaluable. People listened to Tony when he spoke, and by that time, he was already known as one of the Klondike's most accomplished and well-respected miners. What many assumed would be a one-time event swiftly grew into something much more significant. During Parker Schnobel's first season on his own, Tony made several appearances on the show, frequently serving as a mentor to the young child. Tony was more than simply a guest by Season 4. At Paradise Hill in the Dawson Mining District, he was a full-fledged cast member who immersed viewers in his world. One of the most identifiable mining locations on the show was Paradise Hill, which is situated in the center of the fabled Klondike region of the Yukon. The original gold rush in the late 1800s was triggered in the same region. Tony watched, relishing the pandemonium as the flames blazed higher. The episode caused instant criticism when it aired in 2015. The Yukon administration wasn't laughing, and viewers were in disbelief. Tony, his business, and his staff were accused by officials of breaking the Yukon Water Act by dumping rubbish in a water management area and neglecting to report it. Mark Favrin, a welder, paid a modest fee and entered a guilty plea to 1 count. But that was not the end of the case. Prosecutors contended that Tamarack Incorporated should also be held liable and asked for a far larger fine of more than $30. Video from the episode was shown as evidence at the White Horse court case. Favron was seen in the video pouring gasoline into the pond and then setting it on fire while Tony watched. According to Robert Savard, Yukon's chief mining inspector, the inquiry that resulted in the charges was started when Environment Canada filed a complaint, which alerted his agency to the occurrence. Favron said it was an unplanned act done for pleasure while he wasn't working, and that he hadn't aware he was being filmed. Peter Chisholm, the judge, however, was not persuaded. He made it plain that Tony was entirely accountable for the stunt because he had the opportunity to stop it, but chose not to. The court also pointed up Tony's lack of regret and implied that the show's notoriety helped him. Tony acknowledged that he should have known better after the case. He admitted that he should have prevented the conduct from occurring as the man in authority. He ultimately agreed to pay the charge and called the entire situation an overly dramatic comedy. The majority of fans were unaware that the fire was real, which is crazy. When it was revealed that Tony and his team had been found guilty in court, many people assumed it was just another outrageous TV hoax. Tony was so energized and prepared to make an impression when Gold Rush returned for its 12th season in September 2021. He was aiming for a huge target this time, 9,000 ounces of gold. Tony went all out to relaunch his Indian River operation, spending an astounding $5 million on a new fleet of heavy-duty machines. In addition, he maintained his Paradise Hill claim continuously, 24 hours a day. Then, however, came the unexpected turn that altered everything. Tony was aware that the lack of a water license for Indian River was a serious problem. He wasn't looking to get into any more trouble after his previous run-ins with the law, including that notorious Viking baptism dispute. Tony went out to finally get the necessary documentation cleared so he could dig into one of the Yukon's finest gold regions. Cameras rolling. Tony entered the office to inquire about the approval of his license during a tense moment that season. Silently, the crew waited. His look told it all when he came back. The application was turned down. He would need to start over and submit the full document again. Anyone familiar with government documentation understands what that means, waiting for months. And it was time he just did not have as a miner laboring against the clock. It was a devastating defeat. Millions had already been spent by Tony to get Indian River ready, and that investment remained dormant. He was obviously frustrated when he later told his family the news. Referring to Indian River as the family's piggy bank, he acknowledged that no other claim could ever match its potential. However, Tony and his team didn't leave without anything. Over 227 ounces of gold, valued at over $400,000, were weighed at the end of the week. Although it wasn't sufficient to make up for the losses, it demonstrated that Beets wasn't giving up easily. That's just the way gold mining works. Enormous dangers, costly expenditures, and no assurances. Tony handled it with his characteristic grit as always. He simply goes on to the next excavation when one door closes. In season 13, Tony Beets returned with the same unwavering zeal. After 5,000 ounces of gold, another enormous objective. This time, he had to run several cuts across Paradise Hill while balancing everything from deteriorating equipment to erratic Klondike weather. But in the midst of the pandemonium, Tony flourishes. Reintroducing his idle Kiwi wash plant into the game was one of his best decisions that season. Tony leased it to Shane at Dominion Creek rather than leaving it unutilized. It was a shrewd business move that helped smaller miners increase their own output while generating revenue from idle equipment. The season wasn't simple, though. The staff had to deal with supply chain delays that never ended, hydraulic leaks, and torn conveyor belts. However, Tony's active leadership kept things going. His children, Mike, Monica, and Kevin, were right there with him, handling logistics, solving issues, and demonstrating that they were prepared to continue the Beets tradition. Tony made another audacious step when output was endangered by equipment breakdowns. He brought back to life the long-neglected Moose Creek trommel, a plant that had lain dormant for many seasons. After it was fixed, it was essential to maintaining the flow of gold at a crucial period. That was a fantastic occasion to capture Tony's mining mindset. Use what you have, adjust quickly, and don't let a broken machine halt your development. The Beets family had a successful season, collecting almost 4,600 ounces of gold, valued at over $7 million, in spite of all the hardships. It was more than just a win. It demonstrated their tenacity and work spirit. It really paid off to run operations around the clock, branch out into new cuts like 80 pup, and continuously adjust equipment. Tony didn't stop there either. By renting land to the Winchester team, a bunch of inexperienced miners mining the deep cut, he went one step farther. Serving as both a landlord and a mentor, Tony imparted his wisdom and assisted them in navigating the season's obstacles. As a result, the novices achieved their 200-ounce target. It was a moment of pride that demonstrated the extent of Tony's influence. He was no longer merely a gold miner. By transforming his enterprise into a training ground for the upcoming generation of Klondike miners, he was leaving a lasting legacy. Nevertheless, controversy still managed to find him despite all of that accomplishment. A strange tale that began to circulate online in April 2025 soon attracted everyone's attention. According to the narrative, two of the biggest stars from Gold Rush on Discovery Channel, Tony and Mike Beets, received life sentences. The claim went viral on social media in a matter of days, particularly on YouTube and TikTok. Tony Beets and Mike Beets from Gold Rush were condemned to life in prison in a video that was broadcast on April 2, 2025, and quickly amassed over 210,000 views. A week later, another appeared, propagating the same ludicrous assertion. While some fans immediately accepted it, others began researching, posing queries, and consulting references. Here's the reality, though. It was all a lie. No one was arrested, convicted, or given a life sentence. It was all just another viral fake designed to increase participation and attract attention. No reliable source had documented any legal issues regarding the Beets family, according to Snopes and other truth checkers. The rumor was one of several falsehoods that were spread to attract views, likes, and shares from well-known reality TV stars. The misunderstanding was probably caused by Tony Beets' actual run-in with the law, which happened in the past. Tony was charged with breaking the Yukon Waters Act when he was on Gold Rush. During one of his mining operations, gasoline was spilled over a dredge pond and set on fire, which led to case. It was dramatic, to be sure, but Tony was spared jail time in favor of penalties, cleanup expenses, and some significant delays in obtaining new water licenses. He continued his business in spite of the controversy and was never imprisoned for a day. Tony's troubled past with fellow miner Parker Schnabel is another factor that frequently puts him at the center of controversy. They had a good beginning to their relationship. A young Parker received guidance from Tony, who assisted him in taking over his family's large nugget mine. However, after business became involved, the friendship deteriorated. Parker leased land from Tony, but tensions quickly arose due to the royalty system hidden in that agreement. Parker's take-home pay decreased as he extracted more gold under the lease. Parker was tired by the 9th season. On the episode, he gave a direct explanation. He owed Tony 25% in royalties after 6,000 ounces. On 8,000 ounces, Tony would immediately receive about $2 million as a result. He had already ceased mining early the previous year in order to prevent suffering a significant loss due to those payments, and he had no intention of making the same error twice. Parker's staff devised an ingenious solution when Tony refused to renegotiate the agreement. After every 500-ounce haul, they started swapping wash plants, the enormous devices that sort through dirt and extract gold. They outwitted Tony's system by figuring out a means to lower the royalties due through equipment rotation. When Tony realized, he became enraged. When Parker's crew began transferring gold-rich earth from the leased land to their own claim, it was the last straw. At that point, Tony rushed onto the property, turned off the electricity, and immediately closed Parker's wash facility. They exchanged heated words. Given that Tony was already making over $1 million from his job, Parker charged Tony with being avaricious, but Tony refused to budge, adamant that the bargain was the deal. Following Parker's furious departure at the end of the exchange, their once close friendship became one of Gold Rush's most intense rivals. Parker wasn't exempt from problems behind the scenes either. He has received his fair share of legal complaints over the years, including accusations from former workers and assertions that some Gold Rush scenes, such as on-screen altercations, were staged for television drama. Todd Hoffman, another youngster, encountered his own issues in the meanwhile.